My name is Sjoberg. I'm a member here at River City Church. I'm happy to be giving the talk today. We're continuing on our series of afterlife, not afterlife, but afterlife. It's after Jesus' resurrection, his different appearances that he made, all the way leading up to Pentecost. Here's the catch. Pentecost was last week, so what are we doing right now? Why are we still talking about this? This is a bonus message that Jared mentioned earlier on one of his previous talks that's about Saul, or later named Paul. By the way, throughout this message, I'm going to probably use those terms interchangeably, Saul and Paul, just because they refer to the same person. I'm not talking about two different people. But Saul's life meant a lot to me, and it means a lot to me right now. But when I was a kid, when I was really little, I loved the story of Saul of Tarsus. I was obsessed with it. As a matter of fact, when I was a little kid, this is how much of a Bible nerd I was. If you asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would say, I want to be a minister evangelist like Paul. Deep levels of nerdiness there. But the idea is that I didn't even know what a minister evangelist was, but I just wanted to be like Paul. And part of the reason is because he was a man who knew who he was and his mission. And he was a man with a quest. There was actually one story that really spoke to me very deeply when I was a kid. It's kind of a crazy story. When he was in Lystra. You guys know the story of him in Lystra? Some of you might know it. But he's in Lystra and he is preaching to people who do not know God. And they worship other gods. They worship other deities. And they say, hey, you're doing a pretty good job preaching. We want to worship you too. You must be a god. He's like, no, that's not how this works. There's no other god but God alone. And what did they do? They wanted to kill him for saying that. And so they ended up stoning him. If you don't know what stoning is, it means that people throw stones at you until you die, essentially. And sometimes they bury you halfway down. Dark way of starting a sermon, I know. But they did that to him, but he didn't die. They just dragged him out of the city, and all the disciples of Jesus came out and circled around him. He gets right back up, and he walks right back into the city. And the next day, he was preaching again. And the reason why he did that is because there are still souls that need to know Jesus. And he went back into the city to preach. That kind of steadfastness, that kind of purpose, I think is so beautiful. I think a lot of young people love the idea of being on mission and living for something that's bigger than themselves. I think sometimes we get that wrong, though. But I think that's one of the reasons why I have two little boys, by the way, why little boys like to play video games all the time, because they want to be on a little quest. They want to be on their own little journey. But a lot of people love that, and sometimes we answer it in all the wrong ways of wanting to be on a quest. What is this world? Who am I? These are questions that people ask. What is my calling in my life? This is a common question. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't find answers in Christianity hardly anymore. There are some people who look at Christianity and they say, I don't see my life to be on mission in this. And there's lots of reasons for that. But unfortunately, there is kind of a decline. It recently has steadied, but went back here. I'm new to this clicker thing. In 2007, roughly about 78 of Americans identified as Christian. In 2024, 62 identified as Christian. This might not be surprising to you. 29% of Americans now identify as religiously affiliated. What did I say? 29%. 15, which means that 15,000 churches are expected to close this year alone. All right, so this is kind of crazy. Now, again, it's been steadied. Most recent years, it's slowed down the pace, but there's lots of reasons why people are walking away. They're not finding that meaning in the church anymore. They're not finding that meaning in Christianity. Now, is it there? I believe it is. I believe it absolutely is there. I think that a lot of replacements that we have just don't measure up. They don't. And a lot of the questions people are asking is, who am I? But they're not asking the framework. Because whenever you ask that question, who am I in this world? You're asking ultimately, where do I fit in? And if God is the ground of all being, if he is the source of all reality, if that's who he is, it's ultimately a question of who is God? And often people are answering that question with never having an encounter with him. Barna Group and, I'm going to go to the next one. Barna Group and the Pew Center research have actually looked at the different statistics of why people say they've left the church or deconstructed or just don't show up. The first one is politics become identity. When this happens, a lot of people are turned off by religion, specifically Christianity. When that becomes mixed together, it can really be a turnoff for a lot of people. And they think, I don't necessarily want to be a part of that. Another one is the science perception problem. People think that, they believe that science has disproved Jesus or something. Moral relativism, meaning that they don't believe that truth is real. Truth ultimately doesn't exist, so what matters is just kind of like what everyone believes. You can believe whatever you want to believe. It's really a good way of being nice. Not necessarily loving, but nice. And then here is the biggest one. Nominal faith never took root. What does that mean? Nominal faith means you are just a Christian in name only. That's all that their Christianity is. Well, what that means is that the next generation after you, you wouldn't expect your children to follow Christ. And right now, the biggest decline, according to all the research studies, nominal faith is the biggest one, that it never takes root. The next generation of kids after their parents are really kind of just Christian in name only. They don't find the Lord. Sometimes they do. That's wonderful when that happens, but that's kind of the trend. Here's not the biggest one, but it is a major one, which is kind of what we're going to be talking about today. Hypocrisy and institutional trust. Christians are perceived to be judgmental, or they betrayed people's trust. Whether that be in an institution or a very popular leader. This is kind of a thing these days, unfortunately. But this is a major reason why people have, quote unquote, deconstructed their faith. And again, in all these things, in all these different reasons why people have lost their faith, there is a question that they're answering. They're answering the question, who am I or who is God, without having an encounter with him. Or they genuinely did have an encounter, but they didn't abide in the vine because they had this idea because of something that happened to them, because of something they read, or because of a real traumatic experience. They've chosen different alternate beliefs. One of the biggest contributions of Tim Keller's ministry in my life, I love Tim Keller, but one of the biggest things is his simple idea that behind every doubt, every deconstruction, every skepticism is really an alternate belief. There's a reason why you doubt. And because it's an alternate belief, it can also be challenged. It can also be deconstructed. He says it this way: the only way to doubt Christianity rightly and fairly is to discern the alternate belief under each of your doubts, and then ask yourself what reasons you have for believing it in the doubt. In fairness, you must doubt your doubts. Now, I say that just because I know many people who are in my life, who I love very deeply, who have walked away from the faith. I know that's the case. And a lot of it is because of hypocrisy. Today, we're going to be talking about one of those judgmental people. This is the Apostle Paul, previously known as Saul. His name changed not because of any kind of spiritual awakening. It's simply because when he became an apostle to the Gentiles, he started to be called Paul instead of Saul, which is more of a Jewish name. But Saul originally was extremely judgmental. He was a very, very judgmental person and was one of those religious zealots who was an enemy of the church. Last week, we talked about the day of Pentecost, where the presence of God, the very holy of holies that was supposed to be in the temple, fell on believers and people from different nations. And then it fell on Samaria after that. Well, during this time, a man named Stephen was appointed a deacon, and he was a man who really loved the Lord. He was a great servant of even the poor. And he went and proclaimed in the temple and proclaimed to the highest leaders who were religious of the day of who God is and who Christ is. He gave the whole history of Israel to the highest leaders in the Jewish world, and then says, at the very end, he said that it's you who crucified him. And they were so angry at him. They gnashed their teeth, tore their clothes, and they dragged him out, and they stoned him. And they actually killed him. And while you stone somebody, for the mechanics of it, you take off your outer garment, like your jacket, and you hand it to somebody. Who did they hand it to? Saul. He held the jackets so that everyone was free to kill this young man, Stephen. Now, in the book of Acts, right after that, we see the move of God. People are discouraged, then they become encouraged again. We see this man named Philip do amazing things over at Samaria, and then preach to this man who's an Ethiopian eunuch. It's great. And then it goes back to this man, Saul. This is the background for our verse today. So this is Acts chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. But Saul, still breathing threat and murder toward the disciples of the Lord, approached the high priest to ask for letters from him, to take to the synagogues in Damascus. Essentially, synagogues were churches, essentially, in Damascus. He wanted to get approval letters from the high priest so that if he found anyone in the city belonging to the way, that's the original name for Christian, by the way, it's those who belong to the way, either man or woman, that he can bring them back to Jerusalem in chains, tied up. Breathing threat and murder. This is the literal version of what is said in Luke's book of Acts. And he was breathing that because it wasn't just simply a duty for him. It was an obsession. He wanted to stamp out this thing called the Christian movement. He wanted to find anyone belonging to the way and remove them. He had everything. He had the scriptures, the tradition, the pedigree. He talks about this in Philippians chapter 3, how he was the Israelite of Israelite. He studied under Gamaliel, who was a very famous rabbi at the time, zealous beyond his peers. He was completely religious and completely wrong. He had the name of, I'm a part of the people of God, but never had an encounter with the Lord. So I want to just step back and just talk a little bit about the Pharisaical mindset, because we can look at Paul and be like, oh, he's crazy. He's just a crazy guy. He's not just a crazy guy. There's a reason why he thought what he thought. There's a reason why he was so judgmental. Here's a few reasons why, just thinking about from a Pharisaical perspective, they saw the people of God as the true people that was bringing back Eden into this world. That's where it was found in the tabernacle, it was found in the temple, and all these laws were built around of purity to ensure that we protect ourselves so we can have the presence of God with us. And the worst thing in the world are those pagans out there, those people out there. We don't want to be like them, okay? This is from their perspective, not my perspective. But they were saying, we don't want to be like those people. We want to be pure. And how they interpreted the Roman occupation at the time and previous empires who took over their nation was that they said, the reason why we are under this occupation and that we're not on top, because we're supposed to be God's people, is because we're not pure enough. It's because we are compromising. And because we're compromising, we are not where we should be. So we have to put extra laws on people. And so when you see this movement called the Way of a crucified Messiah, it's not just simply wrong. It's blasphemy. See, in the book of Deuteronomy, it says that cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree. That is the Messiah? You got to be kidding me. That can't be the Messiah. That's a curse. The resurrection claim was extremely destabilizing as well. It meant that God had vindicated a Torah violating blasphemer. Not acceptable. Not okay. Stephen's speech was a direct provocation. That was his fault. That's why he died, because it was his fault. That's just from their perspective. And probably the worst part is that they were blurring covenant boundaries on the day of Pentecost and also in Samaria, including in people who are Gentiles. That is not acceptable, not okay. Why? Because we are the people who are trying to protect God's people. That's what we're doing, the Pharisees. We have to have purity here, and they're ruining it, which means we're holding God's move back. This is his mentality. This is Saul's mentality. Saul was Elijah in his mind, ending the lives of those Baal prophets, just like it was in the Old Testament. He was on a mission, purging unfaithfulness, hastening God's restoration, which is why this event that we're talking about today, the Damascus Road, didn't just change his mind. It inverted his entire moral universe. There is a danger in having religion without an encounter with the Lord. There's a serious danger in that. All right. So Christ doesn't meet us always at our best. He meets us where we need him the most. I think I'm having some issues with this. My apologies for that. So instead of Saul coming to stop Christians belonging to the way, something stops Saul in his way in this case. Now, I want to just say a few things about this too. Again, religion without Christ, religion without an encounter doesn't create disciples. It creates persecutors. And we have to be aware of that in our own lives. Are we abiding with him? Because if we don't, the natural response is to point the finger. Why is America so wrong? It's because of those Republicans. It's because of those Democrats. It's because of those MAGA people. It's because of the socialists in our society. It's them. It's those other people. If that's our entire framework, if that is how we start, we're off. If we start with the image of God, that we are all not only valuable, that we all have a call on our life, if that is where we start, and if we start with seeking God's presence, if I am made in God's image, that means you are made in God's image, and you are made in God's image, and you are made in God's image. That means I can't treat you by anything other than what God wants to be holy. I can't. So Saul stopped. Christ takes the initiative. Let's go to our next verse here. So here is the next section where we have Saul encountering something. Now, as he went on his way, he approached Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven shined around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, who are you, Lord? He replied, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise and enter the city, and you will be told what to do. He tells this story two more times in the book of Acts, one in chapter 22 and another time in chapter 26. It says that the light was so bright, it was brighter than midday bright, just extremely light all around him. He was thrown to the ground, which is not, it's a simple like nudge. He was thrown to the ground. And something about these features that are here, this is from a textual perspective. This is the nerdy part of me coming out, so my apologies if this is abrasive. But this echoes different Old Testament callings of prophets very closely. It's similar to how Samuel was called. It's similar to how even Abraham or Jacob was called. You find the repeated name, but the closest in the Old Testament to his calling is that of Moses, who is on his path, turning away, and he sees a bright light who's speaking to him directly, Moses, Moses. I don't think Saul is the new Moses, that's Jesus, but you do see a lot of parallels here, and Paul picked up on that. He said, I'm having an encounter with God. I'm having an encounter with the Holy One. But instead of looking and seeing a burning bush, he sees a man. This is called a theophany. So if you ever have like a Bible commentary book, like a Bible study book, and you look in the commentary on the edges of the commentary, it will say, oh, this is a theophany. Well, what is a theophany? It's a visible or audible or tangible manifestation of the presence of God. That's what it is. And he was experiencing that. So in Paul's mind, he's going directly to this prophetic calls, and he's asking himself, wait, I'm having an encounter with God. Is God finally returning? All the things I was doing before, trying to be pure enough, trying to make everyone else pure enough, trying to do everything right, dot all the I's, cross all the T's, do everything I can to make sure God's presence comes back to his temple. Is that happening right now? Despite what I've done? Is that actually happening right now? Is he returning to Zion? He recognizes this is a divine encounter, but all of his categories are collapsing. He's not asking for a name, by the way. When he says, "Who are you, Lord?" He's not saying, "Who is that person over there?" That's not what he's doing. He's stumbling. He's lost. He has been the one defending. He has been the one protecting, not persecuting. And at this moment, that entire rationale completely crumbles. He can't help but ask, "Who are you, God? Who are you, Lord?" The word Lord can be translated from the Yahweh, or it could be Adonai. Just looking in the context, it looks like this is referring to Yahweh, his worshipful attitude, his deepest longing, not his most immediate longing, but his deepest longing is breaking through his theology. Behind all this question of who are you, Lord, is behind those secular versions of who am I? What is real? Where do I fit? All of these are just coming into one spot in Paul's experience, all in one place. Who are you, Lord? He doesn't know his God anymore. He realizes everything, that all the categories he had, they're all falling apart. The presence didn't wait for him. He was trying to bring the presence in. He was trying to bring God's love in. He's trying to bring God's power in so he can defeat all those nasty Romans. But the presence didn't wait for him. It came to him when he was still an enemy. Oops. Okay. So two things are happening simultaneously. Number one, Jesus says, "I am Jesus." Some scholars will say this is the phrase ego eimi in the Greek, which goes back to some of the John passages where Jesus says, "I am the bread of life," or "I am the resurrection and the life," or "I am," when the people came to arrest him and they all fell down when he said, "I am," which goes back again to Genesis chapter 3. Now, some commentators say that's what's happening here, some who don't. I think the context demonstrates, because of the similarities of what's happening with Moses and the burning bush, and if you remember from that occurrence in the burning bush where the voice that came out says, "I am Yahweh, go and deliver my people." He says, "Who will I say sent me?" And he says, "I am who I am." That same construction is used here, which is kind of an awkward way of saying it in the Greek, but it's used here, so it's interesting. So he, number one, shows his identity, and second of all, he shows his character. When Richard Bachman put it this way, the revelation on the Damascus Road was not just a call to a mission, but the apocalypse of divine identity of Jesus. It was a moment in which Paul was given to see what the exalted Jesus belongs within the unique identity of Israel, of Israel's God. And the next thing Jesus says, "Why are you persecuting me? And why are you persecuting my people? I am Jesus whom you are persecuting." He doesn't say, in a sense, or through those people in a transitive property kind of way because they're on my mission, and because you're hurting my mission, you're hurting me. No. Why are you hurting me? Why are you persecuting me? Why are you persecuting me? To touch God's people is to touch him. The incarnation is here on permanent display. He has bound himself to nature. It's not as though that we're saying, oh, we need to become united with God. No, God says, I am becoming united with you. You are my people. John Stott put it this way. John Stott is a famous theologian. He wrote a book called The Message of Acts. The exalted Lord did not ask, why are you persecuting my people? But why are you persecuting me? The implication is that there is such a close union between Christ and his people that to touch them is to touch him. When you suffer, he suffers. When you are pursued and abandoned, he is pursued and abandoned. He's bearing it with you. He is not at a distance. Our connection with the Lord means that he has come into human nature. He is fully God, and he is fully yours. And he calls you to be fully his. So what does this idea of resurrection mean for a Pharisee? What would the resurrection specifically? Because Paul is encountering the risen Lord. This is Jesus. He sees, this is Jesus, the one I've persecuted. This is turning my whole world upside down. Who is this person, Jesus? And what does this resurrection mean? Now, there were categories they had in their mind. And so what I believe is that Paul is seeing this encounter with Jesus. Now, in the immediate context, it doesn't say he actually saw Jesus, but you see that in verse 17 and verse 27 of chapter 9. But he sees the risen Lord. He hears his voice. He recognizes that he was on the wrong side, and he is now a blind man, struck blind, having to be essentially walked to the city by his companions, blind like a baby. He has to be dependent on them fully. He can't do anything on his own because he's completely blind, which I'm sure if any of us had a theophany, an experience with God himself, we probably have the same reaction, right? Our eyes would go blind. But what this means is that in the Pharisaical mindset, the Jewish expectation is that at the end of history, at the end of time, there would be a resurrection where every tear would be wiped away, everything would be made right. That was their expectation of what was happening. But Jesus is not raised at the end of history. He is raised at the middle of history. Oops. So he's one man ahead of the schedule. For Saul, this means that a new age is broken in. If Jesus is raised, Jesus is vindicated by God. If he is vindicated by God, okay, the cross was a plan, not a scandal. If the cross was the plan, the Torah, the law, the prophets, all pointed to him all along. If the Torah is not opposed to Jesus, it was always anticipating him. The resurrection is what is known as the aparche, the first fruits of what our hope is going to be. It's the down payment of what our hope is in Jesus. All of Israel's hopes and dreams are found in this one risen man. And Paul's letters, Romans, Galatians, Ephesians, his lifelong attempt to work out the implications of this single encounter. He did have presence with the Lord throughout his life. But this is a pivotal part of his story, that you can start to see why he talks about God and why he talks about Christ and why he talks about the inclusion of the Gentiles in a specific way. Because it is his Pharisaical mindset being flipped upside down through the vision of a risen Christ. Okay. All right. I am going to do something I've never done before in a message. I'm going to take something called an apologetics break. So this is kind of a unique thing. I just felt the Lord as I was preparing for the sermon to talk through this a little bit. Oops. And the reason why is because in Christianity, one of the most important things is the resurrection, if not the most important belief that we have, is that Jesus actually rose from the dead. If he didn't rise from the dead, what are we doing here? All this whole sermon series even falls apart, right? So I want to just say something real fast. There is a belief that people have, and it is a belief that's very popular on YouTube or podcasts. It's called the development resurrection theory, the developed resurrection theory. And so the idea is that, the resurrection just developed over time. These stories, the Gospels weren't written until like 30, 40 years later after this happened. So the earliest Christians actually didn't believe in the resurrection. No, this is their belief, not mine. They didn't believe in the resurrection. It's just something that came and evolved over time. All right? These are pretty high, well-known people, well-known YouTubers and podcasters that have talked about this. So 4 Gospels, this actually says 40 to 70 years later after Jesus died. That's the latest of a lot of the skeptical perspective. Mark is the earliest, and it's the shortest as well. So Mark is the first one written. It's the shortest resurrection account. And then you have Matthew and Mark with a little bit of elaboration. And then John, which is the latest one, has the most elaborate resurrection account. So clearly it was developed over time. This is their perspective. The legend develops as different communities join. Some prominent people in this perspective are Bart Ehrman. This is Matt Dillahunty. You've probably seen him on YouTube before. He's a famous atheist debater. And people like Alex O'Connor, even though Alex O'Connor has recently changed his perspectives on this because of what I'm going to say. Not because of what I'm going to say, because of the evidence. All right? No, it's not me. All right, so what I want to do is just give you 3 things that you can take with you, because you probably have friends, coworkers, relatives, neighbors. You go to a coffee shop with them. They want to say why they're not a Christian. This might come up. So how would you respond if someone gave that objection? If one of your friends said, I don't believe in the resurrection because blah, 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 what I just said, the development theory. How would you respond? All right? Here are 3 things you can keep in your back pocket, right there, ready for you. Number 1, this is the reason why that doesn't work, okay? All right, the gospel accounts are not developed over time. They are pulling from different eyewitnesses. Luke says this at the very beginning of his gospel. Dear Theophilus, I've taken all these eyewitness accounts and I'm putting them in an orderly fashion. All right? So he is actually bringing what he is hearing from different people by the guidance of the Holy Spirit and writing them down. That is exactly how the process occurred. And with that, just so you know, for the longest time, people thought that that was kind of just Luke's thing. That's what Luke does, right? Luke just, he has his way of just pulling different accounts together. Well, it turns out the most recent scholarship, I'm talking in the past like 30 years, I read books like this. I love like reading about how like books and letters were written in the first century. What we find is that scribes were often used alongside the biblical authors. And they collected different sayings. Even if you were writing something like a letter to a personal person you know, or to a ruler, or to a group of people. Outside of Christianity, you would typically have different sources. You say, I said this one thing this one time. Can we put that in? And they would, okay, sure, we'll put that in. And they'll help you write the form of the letter. It was a very normal thing to occur. So it wasn't just Luke. Mark and Matthew and John were relying on sources. Mark, in the tradition, says that he is connected to Peter in his testimony. John, probably connected to Mary Magdalene, especially with the resurrection story because it's so intimate and personal. The variety of different testimony is expected that we see from genuine eyewitnesses. And it's also important to know that there is different witnesses, different eyewitnesses who are contributing, but there's also a different emphasis depending on the gospel you're reading. Could be Mark, he has a different emphasis. He wants to leave people with this kind of openness, like, oh, Jesus just rose from the dead. Oh my goodness. and others would have more of a detailed approach based on their overall idea. So shorter accounts isn't primitive, it's just focused. Okay? You guys with me?
Oh, yeah.
All right, okay. Second, embarrassing details signal authenticity. So, this is kind of uncomfortable to talk about because people in the Roman world were very much chauvinistic, but it's important to note that there are embarrassing details for a person who's writing in the first century. Okay? You may have heard this one before, but not in the context for this argument for the resurrection. So, we do, by the way, have gospels out there that are not really gospels. If you remember like 15, 20 years ago, if you're old enough, you probably remember on the History Channel, it was always like, oh, the lost gospels of the Bible, the lost books of the Bible, right after LL Cool J's special, The Knights Templar. It's like, yeah, this is legit. But it's, you have this kind of like over-exaggerated, but here's the deal. A lot of the extra books in the Bible, books that were not included in the Bible, the early church knew about. You know, we actually have the writings of the people that the disciples discipled and who they discipled and who they discipled. And they talked about these books like, hey, by the way, you shouldn't read like the Gospel of Judas or the Apocalypse of Peter or the Gospel of Peter because they're not from our community. They're actually from other people who are trying to do what is called pseudepigraphy, which is a fancy way of saying they didn't write those books, all right? Peter didn't write the Gospel of Peter. So, what they find is this extravagant, over-the-top resurrection accounts and no embarrassing details, such as women being the first to see Jesus, or how after the resurrection, some still doubted. If you remember that, actually, in the book of Matthew. Why would he say that? I remember being a kid and thinking, like, I wish that wasn't there. Well, I'm happy it's there because it's authentic. It's real. And what is interesting, too, is that these other gospels, these fake gospels, we know what their development looks like. They're kind of their fictionalized version of the resurrection. One, they actually have Jesus who, they said, oh, Jesus rose from the dead, but guess what? He was never dead because he was never really a human in the first place. He only appeared to be one. Well, that's appealing to the Platonic views at the time, that the physical world is bad and the spiritual world is good. That was a Greek way of thinking. And another one, in the Apocalypse of Peter, when I read this the first time, I was like, this is so weird. A golden cross shoots out of the tomb and just fills the entire sky. Only triumph, no embarrassing details, no nuance, no one doubting, no women confessing, none of that. It's just clearly a product of development. But again, what do you find with the Gospels? Authenticity, honest reporters keeping in the hard details. So, number one, different witnesses, different emphasis. Two, embarrassing details signal authenticity. And the third one, Paul, the guy we're talking about today, this is the reason why I want to bring this up, completely obliterates the timeline, that timeline of the development theory. Paul is the first person to write a book in the New Testament. He's the first one. And his letters emphasize the resurrection. And not only emphasizes, but he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, without the resurrection. This is predating all the Gospels. Again, it completely puts a wrecking ball to the whole idea of it was developed over time. He says, without the resurrection, we above all people should be pitied because we're wasting our time. If Jesus did not rise from the dead. So, he's also talking to churches. This is not a controversy. This is not a dispute. It is a unanimous acceptance. All right. He also says this in his, by the way, So he says this in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and this is important because people even like Bart Ehrman have to recognize this is actually a tradition that most scholars date back to about 3 to 4 years after Jesus died. This passage where I'm going to read to you right now. This is from 1 Corinthians chapter 15. For I deliver to you as of first importance of what I also received, this portion, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried and he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. So that phrase right there, that verse, predates all of that. That's actually what they call an early creed that was in the scriptures. Yes. For some reason, the whole verse is not there. So let me go find it here. Yes. And he continues to say, then he also appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, to one untimely born, he appeared to me. Okay. So the resurrection is something that Paul fully accepted. He fully acknowledged. Scholar N.T. Wright, in his book, The Resurrection of the Son of God, says this: the empty tomb and the appearances of Jesus together provide sufficient evidence to affirm that the early Christians were justified in believing that Jesus had been raised from the dead. He goes on to say, the proposal that Jesus was bodily raised from the dead possesses unrivaled power to explain the history data that's at the heart of early Christianity. It's one of the most things that we can say about Christianity is that all Christians believed that Jesus rose from the dead. All right. Okay. All right, so Paul believes in the resurrection now. He sees the resurrected Lord. He's going right back to, or he's going to Damascus. And a man named Ananias sees a vision. He hears from Jesus saying, go and talk to Saul. He's like, are you kidding me? That guy? I don't want to do that. He says, no, I want you to do this. And here's a very important part of this. I'm not going to read the whole passage. I'm just going to read this one verse. God tells Ananias, Paul is my chosen instrument to carry out my name before the Gentiles and kings and the people of Israel. This was God's plan all along, to redeem the nations. If you go to the very end of your Bible and the book of Revelation, you will see that it's people from every nation, every tribe, every people, every tongue who are brought in. The breaking of all the nations are completely reversed. And in Paul's ministry, he is directly called to be an apostle to the Gentiles. The irony is that the man who came to stamp out the way became one of the way's greatest ambassadors. The people Saul thought was impure and dangerous were the very people he was called to teach. And I've said this before in previous sermons, but it's important to note. Often the place that you're cleansed is the place that you're called. And that's exactly what happened to Paul. The very place he was cleansed is the very place he was called. Now, at the very heart of all of this, of this message today, is simply this: asking the question, who are you, Lord? Who is he? It's a part of every heart's longing. Who is the Lord? And a part of that is, who am I? And if you have never had an encounter with the Lord, it may not be a road to Damascus moment, but it might be his Holy Spirit waiting on your heart. He wants to speak to you, and you're invited to come and experience his presence. He is the one who is the risen Lord. He wants you to know him. If you've left the faith or have walked away for a time, and you're like, I can't believe in this Christianity thing anymore. Think of it this way. Maybe you have an alternate belief in your head that you need to challenge. Because the Lord is here waiting on you. He wants to have a relationship with you. If you are a believer, just note this. The Damascus Road isn't a conversion story. It's a pattern of a Christian life. Every minute, every time that you suffer, you are marginalized and maligned. The risen Christ says, it happened to me. And every genuine encounter with him doesn't just change you, it deploys you. You carry the light. You bear the name. You are called to bear God's image into this world, whether that be as a teacher, as a lawyer, as an architect, as an engineer, wherever you are, as a doctor, wherever you are. God wants you to uniquely share his love, his light, through the fruit of the Spirit, and having an encounter with him. But I'll say this. Don't expect him to always agree with you. Don't expect that. Because if he's just agreeing with you, it may not be God. It may just be yourself. Because God will challenge you in the places you need to be challenged, like he did Paul. Tim Keller put it this way: I've made you a light to the I made you a light to the Gentiles. That's not what he said. This is what he said here. If your God never disagrees with you, you might just be worshiping an idealized version of yourself. But we love Tim Keller, right? Only if your God can outrage and challenge you will you know that you worship the real God and not a figment of your imagination. I don't know who needs to hear this today, but I want to welcome you all. If you don't mind standing up, and we're going to enter some prayer ministry.